All right. Well, welcome to Colored Commentary, a colorful, gospel-centered conversation on race and culture. I am your host, Marcus Lloyd, joined here by my co-host, Antwuan Malone. Say what's up, Antwuan.
What's up, everybody? How y'all doing?
That's right, man. If you are just tuning in, if this is your first time at Colored Commentary, man, this is a great opportunity for you to get to know some of the things that people of color think about race and culture, Christianity. It is definitely a show about Christianity and what's going on in that sense. And Antwuan, I know you and I mean, we this is just an opportunity, I think, for people to kind of peek in on conversations that we are already having all the time.
We've had these conversations at many a parking lot, right. after show or church or whatever, just talking and being animated to each other.
Or just after work, like something at work. It's like, hey man, can you meet me at the Sonic parking lot? I gotta just let this.
I got this thing that I gotta work through, man.
That's right. Antwuan and I have been friends close to 10 years now. We are both in a very similar position. We are both black men working in predominantly white spaces, even married to white women that actually have the same first name. Look, just to make sure the audience knows, there are two black people on this.
There are two black people, and you might get confused. Before this thing is done.
Look, I'm hoping the voice will do it, because when we did this live on videos, I'm afraid that people would be like, which one's Marcus? Which one? Are they the same dude? Yeah. But our lives are so similar in some ways. It's fun to be able to get on the podcast and do this with you because we tend to think differently.
I think our first celebrity crush was the same person too.
Really?
Was it Lisa from Saved by the Bell?
Yeah.
Was you in on Lisa?
Well, I said that a little bit too. I had too much bass in my voice when I did that. It's so creepy.
Yeah.
Lark Voorhees is going to be like, who are these dudes, right?
Nah, she's probably looking for some attention.
That's
now.
probably right, too.
Oh, what? My name was mentioned. I'm sorry. I love you, Lark.
Yes, Lark Voorhees is awesome. Yeah. So this is just an opportunity for us to come together, talk about some of the stuff. And obviously it won't be you and me all the time. We're going to bring in some of our friends. We're a part of an organization called Threaded, which is what powers this particular podcast. And it is all about inspiring relationships, reconciliation, and collaborative action amongst the diverse body of Christ. And so that's there. So we've got lots of folks on our team that are all kinds of different shapes, colors, ethnicities. And so it's fun to get in that conversation and learn so many perspectives that are out there. And so we just kind of want to bring an element of what we've experienced in those relationships over the last 5 years and beyond, bring that into an environment where people can hear a little bit and learn and experience some of the things that we're learning, right?
Right.
Yeah. So today, I think the conversation that I want to talk about is, it came up, as we talk about Threaded, we have a curriculum that we kind of take people through.
Right.
And we get to, I don't remember, I think it's week 9 or so, and there's this question. I was in my Threaded group a couple of weeks ago. It's this question that comes up that really generated a lot of conversation as we were talking about it. And the question was, is Jesus colorblind? And I thought it was an easy answer, right? I thought it was very easy, but it turned out, as the conversation, again, it's a very diverse group of people, not only, sort of demographics of age, race, gender. And so the conversation was just really interesting and exciting. So I thought that would be something that we could kind of dig into a little bit on, is Jesus colorblind, and what are the implications of that, and how does that work? So I think the first place maybe to move into is to really talk about definition, right? Because you talk about that a lot with words.
Yeah. I mean, I think most of the time, we'll get to, but I think most of the time, Facebook arguments and different, not just Facebook arguments, but lots of arguments.
Yeah, just arguments generally.
You start with the fact that people are using words, but those words mean something different to each party.
Yeah.
And so ends up being that they're just talking about two completely different things. So I think it would be good to start with, what is colorblind? What do we mean by that?
And as you start to kind of look at the gamut of it, I mean, there's lots of quote unquote definitions for it, right? I mean, if you go Webster's definition, there's 3 things that they talk about. One is that very physiological understanding, like you're affected in your eyes, like you just don't have the ability to actually see chromatic colors, right? So that's a color blindness, which has implications to the conversation as well in some ways. But I think the most common sense that people kind of maneuver into from a Webster standpoint is really just this idea of a person or someone who is not influenced by differences of race. And then another way that Webster puts it is, you are free from racial prejudice And so those are kind of the Webster's dictionaries of it. But I don't know.
Which one are we going with today?
One and as you go,
Let's
even
go with the first one.
like the first. Well, and even as you get outside of Webster's, you have even ways that the culture uses it, which in and of itself becomes, ipso facto, a working definition that people grab onto.
Right.
Right. And so I think if you think in sociology, it's described as a concept describing the idea of a society where racial classifications do not limit a person's opportunity based on their race or color, as well as race-neutral governmental policies that reject discrimination in any form and said to promote the goal of racial inequality, right? So you've got this idea where it's woven into this desire that the environment wants to create a space where color does not mean anything, right? And so all the policies that we create, all the ways that we interact with people, that color does not become a situation. So it's color blindness as a society.
Color of the skin.
Color of the skin. And again, as we talk about it, we use the word color, but I don't know if that's fully...
I know. It's like an analogy term, almost. That's not such a thing. But, like the word, what they really mean is race blindness.
Yeah, or like maybe. Ethnic blindness or cultural blindness or something.
You have to like deal with what color is in color blindness. And so, what you just described was an environment where the race doesn't matter. You could say that colorblind, like I like to think like, I used to say a phrase and that, we won't have racial inequality until we treat skin color like eye color.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
And so in that sense, you're like saying, okay, people have different color eyes, and yet while I might notice, wow, those are brilliant blue eyes, those blue eyes don't tell me a whole lot about who that person is, even though I might see that. So it's not so much that I don't want to like not. It's not that I want to not notice the color of people's eyes. Yeah. I just don't want that to inform my ideas about them.
Well, what's so funny is like even the analogy you're using right there.
Except the blue eyes. Malcolm X would beg to differ.
Yeah, right. That's right. Stupid. But even the analogy you're using right there is something that was actually an experiment that a teacher did after Dr. King was assassinated. A teacher did an experiment in her classroom where she assigned value to eye color to her children. This was elementary school.
Wow.
And she said the day, she goes, okay, all the kids with brown eyes go to this side, all the kids with blue eyes go to this side or whatever. And she said, okay, all you kids with brown eyes, you're going to be considered dumb. You're going to be considered some sort of negative connotation, and encourage the students to then act on that, right? And so they would go out to recess and they'd be like, oh, we don't want to hang out with you because you're a brown-eyed person, right? And then the next day she flipped it, right? And so now it's like the blue-eyed people, they're the ones who have all those negative connotations. And it was really traumatic, I think, for these kids, right? But it showed that all you got to do is ascribe value. Right. And once you ascribe a particular value, then people react on that. And so this is where I think, again, we're talking about, I think, beyond just color, we're talking about it. And when people utilize it, I think they utilize it in concepts of culture and ethnicity. But even in other countries, I mean, you talk about, if you've ever read Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime.
I haven't.
Man, it's...
Lisa, my wife, has read it, and she said she loved it.
Yeah, and not only is it just hilarious, but he does a really good job of unpacking how color actually played a part in the apartheid. Like we've talked, some people have heard about paper bag tests. If you go to the African American Museum, Smithsonian Museum in D.C., they have a whole section where they kind of talk about paper bag tests. And if you've been in fraternities and sororities in Black America, there's this whole joke around paper bag tests. But in Africa, South Africa, they really would kind of take a paper bag and they would judge where you go in society, whether you're white, colored, or black, based on the paper bag test.
Wow.
So there is color like that. So that idea of color actually means something in this conversation, that there's a skin color that's there. And you're right. I think you mentioned earlier, like, we're in a society that has constructed race. And I think for our conversation today, I think we just recognize that race is a social construct. It's not something that's actually biologically, supported, but it's a social construct. And we could talk about that.
That's a whole other thing.
So just for our understanding, we know that we're dealing with it. There is an aspect of where you're actually talking about the color of skin, but there's this whole other element of ethnicity and culture. So
if we were to restate the question, not using the word colorblindness.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Right, as a way to define what we mean by color. Is Christ colorblind, or is Christ viewing people based on the shade of their skin, or assigning, maybe we might say assigning value. Is that what we would say?
That's interesting.
Or giving opportunities based on, like, what, how might we, if we were to rephrase it?
Yeah, and I think that's one question.
Be like assigning value. Might be like, ultimately it is value.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day.
And and you're right. I think rephrasing the question, and again, I think there's levels, and that's where we'll try to help the audience just kind of see the different things. And so, yes, there is this. Okay, is Christ colorblind? Is he assigning value to people based on the color of their skin?
Right.
Right. So that's a question. But then there is this ethnic, cultural piece, like even stating, like, the way colorblindness is almost articulated is, I don't see color. Right. So people, I don't know. Has anybody ever said that to you?
I've heard it in passing.
Yeah. Well, I've had it said. Like, I've had situations where I've walked people through the differences. Like, maybe if I'm going to take them to a predominantly black church, if they're a white person going to a predominantly black church, and so there's times where I've prepared them. I'm like, oh, look, when you go in here, this is what's going to be going down.
Okay, you're gonna...
Right. And I've had people be offended that I would do that, and they would come to me and say, like, I was offended by that because I don't see color. Right. And again, there is the shade of color piece, but I think in this instance, they were talking about, I don't see culture. I don't see race. I don't see ethnicity.
Right.
Which even saying that aloud is a weird question.
Yeah. When you say it like that, you're like, why would people, what is wrong with acknowledging that you're about to go into a different space that does different things than you do, that you would feel offended that someone says, hey, we're about to go to this area, and the culture of that, the way things are done in that space is different than what you might be used to. Like, oh, how dare you? I didn't say that it was less important or less. Right. I didn't say I didn't assign any value to that thing. I just said that it was different, and so it might be different. You might see some things you hadn't seen before. Right. I think it's interesting that someone would feel offended by that. It's almost a reverse. It's almost like a psychological red flag to say.
Correct.
It's almost like to say, wait a minute, why are you so sensitive about that?
That's the question, right? Like, why? All right, so we know that happens where people will say, I don't see color, right? I think we desire for, you have definitions in which they're trying to ascribe. They want to see a society in which color or ethnicity doesn't play a role.
Yeah.
And so there's this desire to want to remove race from the conversation. So what is the value of removing race or culture or color from a conversation, right? Who's doing it and why?
I had like three thoughts, just like, and then I thought it kind of shot down two or three of them.
That's good. Right?
Yeah, like, no, maybe not that one. Not that one. It's weird. It's because race is such a. Okay, you ask who is doing it.
Yeah,
I think. And I wasn't the one, so you'd have to answer this.
Sure.
Was it the white persons that said, "Hey, I'm offended that you would have to feel like you'd have to tell me that,"
sure.
or was it what was the ethnicity, the race of the persons who were offended? Because it feels to me like a black person would be like, not even need that conversation because that's life for the black person. We just constantly learning how to try to exist in spaces, and whether we're going to flow in or, in a sense, rebel or stand out.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I think it's helpful.
It's the natural way of the black person.
Yeah.
So
I think that's helpful for people to hear, right? Like that color is a constant. Like the idea that I know that I'm black is a constant. It has effects on how I do life.
Right.
Right. It affects that. But to answer your question earlier, like when I've heard it, and I've heard it lots of times, and not just in conversations with people, but I mean when we get online and do different things, and I've heard it, and it's predominantly white people doing it.
Right.
So what is the value?
See, I think
that?
I think the value is that race, the conversation around race, puts the puts the white person in a disadvantageous position to start.
So, like, keep going. What do you?
Well, I mean, the moment you bring up race, typically in America, the white person's on the bad end of that conversation.
Oh, okay. They feel a sense of defensiveness because historically,
right,
they would be the quote unquote bad guy, I guess, in this conversation.
right,
If
kind of the
if
villain.
that's- okay,
And so it would behoove them.
Yeah.
So even on a subconscious level, to be like, I don't even want to deal with the race piece of this.
Right.
Why don't you just let me show you who I am and don't assign me all this other stuff and don't assume all these negative things about me.
Yeah.
In fact, the fact that you have to tell me this means that you must think that I'm like this villain that's in the racial conversation.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to be that. And so the value is to just let me, for those people, I assume, just let me go in there and be.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you think that's intentional? Right? Do you think they're thinking about that?
No, I think, I'm often thinking about things I feel like things happen on a subconscious level.
Right.
And so I think that there's just a little tension that arises.
Yeah.
And like, and here's the deal. I would imagine, because I'm not white fully. No, I'm sure I got something somewhere.
Well, look, the stats tell you that we've all got it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so, but if I would assume that if I were in that position, that's what I would be. I'd be thinking that, and I would want to be my own person in that, and not have you make some assumption about me or what have you. Even though from a black point of view, it's like, I'm not making no assumption about you. I'm just literally giving you info.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right, and I think it's important that we recognize, because I want to be obviously very sensitive.
Yeah.
And recognize that most of the ways that people are dealing with this conversation around colorblindness is not coming from a conscious understanding. It goes back to the ideas of implicit bias, right? Implicit racism, things of those spaces. In fact, there are some sociologists that would call what we're talking about, this sort of color blindness, they would call it not just an ideology, but they would call it colorblind racism as an ideology. And that's a whole nother sort of thing we can get into with adverse racism and all these different types of things. But there is sort of these spaces in which racial dynamics play a part in how we push things in a society, right? So Ruth Frankenberg calls the idea of colorblindness this color evasion. It's an idea of how do we evade a topic. So we use colorblindness to evade the idea of color. And she says it when someone says, I don't see color, that we are all the same. She says this emphasizes on sameness is a way of denying or rejecting the idea of white racial superiority. In theory, this sounds good, right? But it overlooks the fact that people of color are not having the same experiences as white people. So there's this idea that what I want to do is I want to push color to the side, because then I don't have to deal with what you're talking about, this idea of potential white racial supremacy or white superiority that is kind of layered or woven into the conversation around race, or the idea of racial inferiority in some ways.
Possibly. I mean, that's one view, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then the other view is that I can imagine a white person saying, isn't that what you want? Like, isn't that what Dr. King said? Dr. King was like, I want to be judged by the content of my skin, not by I'm sorry.
Content of my color, not by the color of skin, but the content of my character.
Not by the color of my skin, but the content of my character. Yeah. So he's like, it's for those white folks who are like, I actually want to be a part of the solution of that. So I want to be colorblind because I feel like that's what I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
There's that element too, and so like in a statement like what you read there. Could communicate to a white person that, man, I'm sort of I'm kind of crapped if I do, crapped if I don't kind of a deal. Like, man, what? Okay, so I'm not supposed to see people differently because of their color.
Yeah.
But then you also kind of are telling me that I should see people differently because so it could create this sort of weird ambiguity.
Well, like you say, words matter.
Man.
So even because I've had that quote of Dr. King used when I've kind of had these conversations, and I think the key word in that is to not be judged by the color of the skin, right? And so there's this idea that there is, and the implication of that statement. So
the judgment has to do with value and opportunity, and that's the stuff we were beginning with.
Right. And so there's that, and that's part of even this color evasion is. It would be great if we got to a society where people didn't judge that way. But I think there's also this sense in society that color actually does exist, right? And it's the whole idea of what you were talking about just a minute ago is that people of color they work in and live in the society in such a way that color does matter.
Right.
We think about it. We think about it in the clothes that we wear when we get up in the morning.
Right.
We think about it in the way we speak as we get into certain situations. We think about it when we're pulled over by the police. We think about it when we go into a space that's all white and thinking about, like on stage, I'm thinking about it like it's always playing a part. And that's something that when I've talked to white people that they've always been, they haven't been able to get their mind around. It's like, how do you think like that? Like, why do you think like that? How does that happen? But we have to recognize that does happen. And so to push color out of the conversation means I'm not really taking into account that you actually live in a way in which you're thinking about color. And we live in a society that actually still has a racialized and a colorized aspects of it.
Yeah. And if we don't, we know that we are at least thinking that other people in the environment are.
Correct.
And so we've got to respond to their thinking.
Why would we think that other people in the environment are then? I mean, is that a real thing or is that something we've made up?
I think it's because we might hear and know. I think it is a real thing. I think a lot of people are dealing with that. It's like the black community is like the amphibians of the human race.
I can't wait to hear what you're about to say.
Well,
wait a second.
The amphibians.
Wait a second. I want to hear what you're about to say.
No frog.
I'm going to have to cut your mic off here in a minute.
We're not doing it. Gotta be careful assigning black people to any animal. All of a sudden, I got a bunch of frogs in front of my house. Like, yeah, take this, amphibian.
That's right.
All right. So what I mean is like you live in the water, live on land, right?
Uh-huh.
And the adjustment of living in both spaces.
Yeah.
And man, we're land creatures. So we have no idea what it's like to live underwater. Mm-hmm. But the frog kind of does. He knows enough that he can survive down there.
Yeah.
And a fish knows nothing about what it means to live on land, but the frog does. So a black person's kind of this person is often living in America, these two spaces.
Yeah.
Right. And because of that, there's a heightened awareness, if you will, of the fact that, sometimes like we were talking about before, is like, where am I?
Yeah.
Like, am I in water right now? And therefore, I need to do the things.
I need to do the things that
I need to
keep me alive.
I need to swim in water and figure that thing out.
Use my gills.
Or am I on land? And what do I need to do here? And that's kind of what it is. And because of that, at least for the black person, because of that, there is always this heightened awareness of, where am I? Where is this environment? How does this environment affect me? How am I to live in this environment? Kind of a deal.
Yeah, when I'm listening to you, the question I think probably people would go is, okay, why do you make that up for yourself? Right, like that. Why are you guys making, like, that's not real? Or the question, is that contrived? Right? Or is that an actual real thing that you have to do to survive, or is it something you're just doing?
Man,
right?
Wow. Well, I don't know that it's contrived. I think.
Well, look. Here's the deal: I
think that it's
to me,
because most black people would say, "I do that."
Right, and so that's the thing. Like, why?
At least those who are surviving.
Well, and see, the question begs the question: what do you think about black people's ability to exegete their own existence and exegete their own experience? Right, like if you're looking, if you're coming to me and I'm saying the things you're saying about amphibian going back and forth, and you say, is that something you're just doing? Is it real? And I'm going, okay, if there's a lot of black people who do that, so we're either all dumb and don't have the ability to know what environment is, or potentially it's a real thing, and you need to listen and go, man, all these people are doing this. Like maybe there's something true here, but because I think, and this is the proof that our society has devalued blackness so much, is that we don't even get the benefit of the doubt that maybe we're actually having a real experience here. And so you'd have the people who would go, I was at a family event not too long ago, right? That I was talking to a guy who's not, my wife has told me to tell this every time I do it, he's not actually a piece of my wife's family. He was a boyfriend. We don't claim him. He was a boyfriend of somebody else, and we were having this conversation. We were talking about,
As a matter of fact, we don't know him now.
And he actually is not a part, he's not around anymore, I think because of the conversation we had on Thanksgiving. But he was talking about, we were talking about Trump versus Obama, and he was like, you didn't need Obama.
Typical wedding fare.
Yeah, exactly right. And I was like, but I did need to see a black president. And he was like, no, you didn't. And I was like, why do you get to tell me how I'm supposed to feel and what I'm supposed to sing. I'm telling you that in my experience as a black person, I needed to see a black man in the office, right? And so again, here he's telling me, no, that's you don't know what you're thinking. Let me tell you what you're thinking.
You think you need that, man.
Right. Okay. So all that in the conversation around colorblindness, I think moves into even some of the aversion to wanting to have the conversation around color. We talked about kind of color evasion. Now, the other one that I think this young lady, Ruth Frankenberg, would say, the sociologist would say, there's color evasion and then there's power evasion is part of the reason why people do it. And she says power evasion is when someone minimizes the impact of racism, claiming that everyone has the same opportunities to succeed and those who don't have only have themselves to blame. What do you think about that? So everyone has the same opportunities to succeed, and those who don't have those same opportunities only have themselves to blame. So I'm not going to bring color into this.
So this is what she's saying, like if she were writing a color blindness type A or whatever.
Yeah, there would be
point is the first thing
color evasion.
And then we got power evasion.
Yeah, why are people doing it? That's, I think, what she's kind of answering. We're looking at that question. Why are people doing that?
I don't know that. I guess I could see where the conversation of colorblindness could lead to that power thing. I feel like most of the time it's a social. I feel like most of the time the people who are saying I'm colorblind, what they're trying to say is that they're not prejudiced.
Sure.
Socially.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get into the power, the equal opportunities and I'm not sure. I mean, I guess it depends on who's having the conversation,
right?
Because if you're a boss hiring someone, then I guess you say, well, are you colorblind when it comes to hiring?
Correct. Yeah.
And we say, well, we're equal opportunity employer,
right.
And
because we have given those opportunities, the opportunities are the same for you as they are for everyone else. And so if you don't get the job, it's you have your own selves to blame. Right? Or if you have a community.
It wasn't me favoring one thing or another based on your
Right. So I'm going to take color out of it. And in some ways that removes, again, the systemic ways in which color has played a part in our nation's past and present. It removes that and says none of that stuff actually exists. And so if your community is failing, it has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with color. It actually has everything to do with you and everything to do with what you need to do to fix that. So that's kind of that. I think where she's going with that power evasion.
I don't know. I'm not 100% with her on that. I would say that I'm with it on a like 50, not 50, but I believe that may play a part in some of it. I do think opportunities have become more available as time has gone. And so I can acknowledge that and acknowledge that aspect. And I don't think it means that people are saying that white supremacy or black inferiority or color inferiority is not a thing. I think it's a both and. So I feel like, I don't know, I feel like that's a shoehorn in the conversation, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely think if you're trying, and this is, again, projection.
Yeah, sure.
If I'm sitting here going, okay, I want to take race out of the conversation. Like, hey, I don't see race. I don't see color. Again, from a very explicit action of that, I feel like I'm going, I want you to know that I'm not prejudiced. Right. But even in the idea of saying, I want you to know that I'm not prejudiced, in some way affirms that there is a problem with color in our society.
At least a heightened awareness of the fact that color can play
a role in something.
In things.
Right? So why push aside something we know is actually happening?
I don't know, cause so like you deal with the implicit bias of stuff, right? Like if the implicit subconscious, thing of white supremacy is basically the white man is the most intelligent, authoritative, managerially gifted creation from God's work, and anything underneath that is just not as good. And so if that at the subconscious has been taught to you in all these implicit sorts of ways, right? Then when it comes to hiring a manager, without you realizing it, the environment has taught you that the white man is going to be better at managing than any other
implicitly.
Implicitly,
This is
right, right. And there's no law that's going to undo your implicit thinking in that.
Right, and in some ways, the part of the conversation that's hard is there's no law that is actually proving what you're talking about.
There's also
either.
no law, right? Because it's all internal. It's all subconscious. You may not even realize that you carry this kind of
or at least we're talking about it's potentially all internal. But I would say that some of the ways that people would argue against that is that it's not only an internal thing that's happening implicitly, but there is a mechanism. That's actually furthering that inside of you. So it's not something I'm just conjuring inside of me, but there's a whole system that's actually continuing that conjuring inside of you that's systemic.
That is affirming that subconscious reality.
Right.
And then, and you could say this is even across the board. Like, I know some black people, like, they feel more comfortable. They feel more comfortable with a white manager instead of a white boss instead of a black boss. They kind of, the respect levels are different a lot of times and what have you.
Well, and look, just to that point, this is where I think the conversation is important because I think many times we go, the white person is the villain, right? Mm-hmm. And they're the only ones being subjected to sort of this implicit ideology. But the fact of the matter is that if the system is truly the system that's furthering this in us, then it would only make sense that everyone who is underneath the system is also getting the same messages and ascribing the same sort of value to people implicitly at the same time, right? So you just made a statement where you have black people going, I feel more comfortable with white people. Why do they believe that? Well, in some ways, it could be experience, but it could also be the system has taught them to value white people more too. So we, as black people, are still also living where white normative is good and better. We've been taught that.
Right.
And so...
And it helps the conversation to spread that reality across racial lines. Because then it's not just white people think they're better. It's just that systemically,
we're being taught that
as a nation. We view white as more capable of making managerial oversight
or in anything
wise decisions about the long-term viability of a thing.
Yeah, or just the value
hence presidents and CEOs and all those types of things.
So those are kind of the ways I think we can think about it in culture. So obviously we're a show that's talking a lot about the church and the Christianity. How do we see this sort of idea of colorblindness playing itself out in the church? Where does it manifest itself? Are there questions asked? Are there policies created, if you will, ways that we go forward based on a colorblind mentality? Is there something connected to Scripture?
I think churches are way too concerned with optics, and so they're more concerned with optics than they are with solving difficult issues. And so for them, the issue of colorblindness is a marketing issue. It's a PR issue. It's not a actual heart level issue. And so the answers for most churches are we need to hire color, and that'll be the proof, the optical proof that we are not colorblind. And I think that might be one manifestation of that.
Do you think that there is, because I agree, for those churches that would say we're trying to in some ways push against the idea of colorblindness, there would be sort of those marketing optics. We're going to hire diversity. We're going to put more pictures on the website.
Right. We want the website to reflect.
Right.
Even if these aren't our people, we're just going to go find some Asian babies to put on our children's ministry website. And what have you, and they're having a great time with wonderful smiles and dinosaurs.
So that's one where the dinosaurs.
Because Bibles and dinosaurs.
Okay, fair. Why not? That makes complete sense.
Sorry.
So we've got churches in the colorblindness conversation that are moving away from colorblindness, but I also see, I think, in the idea of those who would ascribe to colorblindness, there's this almost spiritual optic of utilizing. What I'm trying to think verse-wise what that is. This idea, I think, is Galatians, is that right? There's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free, there's no male nor female, for we're all one in Christ. So they would utilize that as hey, we're not even thinking about color because God has sort of erased color, and so we have to think about this as oneness, and so we're going to do. So I don't know. What do you think? Do you find that?
I lean a lot on that verse personally.
Sure.
As a experience of identity, But I think, again, that's an optic. Even the verse is being leveraged as an optic more than the actual work of embracing an identity that doesn't base itself on those social constructs. Like it's a good thing to say.
Yeah.
Ooh, we found this verse that we can say and we can speak, and then we've got these pictures that show who we are, and we've got this one guy or girl, probably whatever, this person on the stage who is this other race or what have you, and the collection of that creates the picture. So we don't have to.
We don't have to talk about.
We don't have to deal with the actual fact that there's people in this room who are uncomfortable about that person that's standing on the stage who's not like them.
Right. Well, it comes back to again,
the things that they say and the views that they have and how that affects the way the church actually runs. We would rather push that stuff under the rug and just keep the optic.
Right. And even beyond that, well, there's two things here. You're going back to the idea that those people of color who are in the audience are seeing it differently.
Yeah.
So there's this there's this inability to recognize that there is this other perspective out there. Right. Colorblindness really it homogenizes or standardizes everyone to the point where we don't have to kind of go any further. We don't have to kind of talk anything about. It's this temptation of prejudice goes away because we're standardizing the world around us. So, okay, I'm going to just go ahead and say, hey, we're all the same, and then I won't be tempted to be prejudiced, right? But we don't recognize that implicit bias, those prejudices that exist are potentially there, and we don't have anybody around to kind of help us understand that, particularly the people of color who are in the audience, to be able to go, hey, when you say that, this is what this means. This is how I see this.
Right.
And even to go into another point about colorblindness, I think I see in the church is we're in churches that are thinking about colorblindness or even thinking about it in the way of we want to erase that, they still, because there's such lack of inclusion with people of color in the midst, the way that they even show color in the ways that they do sort of marketing are even ways that are damaging and further damage the conversation between races. I'll give you an example. So my kids, my boys who are biracial, have been going to several different Christian camps in the area. I'm not going to mention them, but there are several that they've gone to, and literally they've gone to. They're going to go to the third one this year. It's not because I don't like the other ones, but at every single one of them,
it's just because you don't like your kids.
Just because my kids
get out.
They don't. That's right. They keep kicking my kids out. Yeah, no, they kick my kids out. No, I'm just kidding. My kids are great. They love it. So we went to one, and I was at this ceremony, and they were showing a video on the camp and who's coming to the camp, and they're showing, and then they go to the scholarship camp. And every time they show the scholarship camp, it was white people holding black children, teaching Latino children. And I called, and I knew the camp director. I said, hey, look, I don't think you know what you're doing. I know you're trying to show more diversity, but the only diversity you're showing are black people and Latino people in situations in which they are inferior are being taught by white people. And if you start to look, now that I've said it, it's like the white Jeep, right? Like, hey, here's a white Jeep. Now you're going to see a white Jeep everywhere. I guarantee anybody who's listening, open up a Christian camp brochure right now. And they're going to have a scholarship camp, because every one of them does. All the black people on that bulletin are going to be in that scholarship camp. And all the white people are going to be in the I paid full price for this camp. And so you're again, now you're pushing, you're trying to be diverse, but you're actually furthering a narrative about where black people or brown people exist in society in reference to white people. They are to be helped.
Let me play devil's advocate.
I love it. Please do. Please do.
So let me play the advocate, right? So if I'm Johnny Sins white man, and
why you got to be Johnny Sins? I'm offended. Antwuan's ideas do not reflect the entire range of color commentary. I don't know where he is.
But if I'm John White man, right? I'm like, okay, I hear you, but you just told me that we are in America where white people are in the powerful position and blacks are in typically the less powerful position.
Right.
So it would be a proper reflection of reality that the odds are that it's true that the scholarships, if they are coming, that the scholarships are being provided by by the powerful white that you've identified to me in the conversation, and that is helping those who are in the inferior position.
Sure. Well, so where I would come back
so to sum it up, it's basically, isn't that statement, as offensive as you may feel about it, isn't that picture saying something that's more true than it is not true?
Yeah, well, see, that's a great point, right?
Clothes of devil's advocates.
No, keep them out. Keep them out. I mean, don't keep the devil out, but keep the advocate out, because it's good, because these are the conversations people have.
Right.
And I think hearing you, and I think it's a good comment, right? I think the idea that is perpetuated is that only black and brown people are living in poverty. But if we actually do the stats, the majority of those in poverty are actually white people.
Right.
Right. Now, the difference, right, is black people or brown people potentially have more, the reason that more of us, if you will, are in poverty have not just to do with our personal decisions, although some of it does.
Sure.
Just
absolutely.
very frankly, it does.
Yeah.
But we also can see, as we layer and we start to think through a country and the country we live in, and the way that race and color has played a part in not only the way you and I relate, but also in the body politic. I mean, we have policies that have been created throughout the existence of our society that were race specific. Right? Where you could live, what kind of job you can have, how much your vote mattered. I think about even the one-drop rule, which was not a law that was codified, or it's nothing something codified into law specifically about if you have one drop of black blood that you were considered African, but it's one that inspired several other laws, particularly ones that if we were living in our state that we're living in now 30 years ago, we would be arrested for, in that you can't do interracial marriage.
Right.
Because there was this protection of the purity of whiteness.
Sure.
Right. And so what I would say is there are a lot of poor white people out there.
Right.
Why are they not represented in the space where the poor people are at the same time? Why is it always a white person? And it also speaks to, look, I grew up like the Cosbys, right? I worked at this will be a funny story, right? Because I've worked at some of those camps. And my kids have gone to some of those camps, right? And so it's funny, the response, which is great. One of the responses that we got when we engaged in a camp in this conversation is the next time we came, they were like, "Hey, can we get a picture of you
I was gonna say,
and your wife and your kids?"
Yeah,
which the role you have to play.
That was the real end game.
That was the real end game. I just wanted I didn't get paid for it, so I don't know. But it's the, hey, how do we, the question becomes more to the camps is like, how do you find the folks like you and like me? How do you create an environment in which they feel that they are welcomed and wanted and that they are needed in that space, right? But again, that goes back to just, as we're talking about colorblindness, right? Like, that is a way we can perpetuate a negative aspect of thinking about color in a very inferior, superior way, right? And again, you're right, it's got holes in it.
Sure.
But it's that conversation. So thinking through that even deeper in, where can we lean in on the Bible for this conversation, right? Are there
specifically
any ways?
Jesus, right? Like, we want to look at where Jesus is, whether he is, how he's dealing with.
Here's what I would say is,
everybody's going to say, no, of course he's not.
Well, but here's what I would say is, I think in the context of the hook, right? Like, is Jesus colorblind? I think Jesus is kind of all through the Bible, right? So I would say, what does God think about colorblindness? But Jesus has, I think there's some specific things about Jesus that are helpful in the conversation.
I think so. I think he's had several interactions that go, that teach us something as Christians, an aspiration for how we ought to interface with people who are different within us across several different sort of social lines.
All right, what are you thinking about?
So I'm like, one of the things I'm thinking about is one of the things that's really interesting to me is that the centurion, a centurion, like all of the centurion stories in the New Testament are good stories.
Okay.
They are. There's no bad ones.
Well, can you say that? Tell me a story that's a bad story.
No. Like
the Bible, give me one.
Judas is a bad story.
Is it a bad story?
It's good for
that's
me.
That's a whole other podcast. Not for Judas. Judas had a bad time in that story.
Judas messed it up for himself, and then he couldn't get himself out of it.
Okay,
anyway, that's
I feel you. I'm just trying to get a definition of what good and bad is.
Let me say it more pointedly.
Okay.
Jesus' interactions and his disciples' interactions with specific centurions, the ones that are recorded, are all where the centurion is pursuing godly things or belief that Jesus is who he says he is. And I think that's an interesting thing for the time frame, for the time period, especially given that the Romans had such a oppressive position oppressor sort of position in the context of Jew and the Roman, and that it would be really easy for the Jews to not see anything good about centurions or to want to hide that. So I think it's interesting that that's there. I think it's interesting that Jesus is honored, that those are the stories that are included about the centurion. Jesus with the centurion who says, "Hey, I know that you have authority." And
so you're talking about the centurion has the power and authority, and he's seeing value.
Well, that's that one story.
Okay,
and then there's a couple stories. If you were to look, I think there's 4 stories in the New Testament with centurions. 3 of them are with Jesus, and then one of them is, of course, with Peter. When Cornelius, and all of them are, and the centurion was a devout, like all of them placed the centurion in a positive light, which I think is interesting for the conversation, especially since the centurion is a Roman white person, and the Jews are brown,
person of color.
And the Romans are in the higher elite ruling class, and the Jews didn't have the same amount of power, and the way that Jesus chooses to interact with them is very interesting.
And he says this is a good thing, like he honors the choice of the centurion.
It seems that he doesn't see the centurion as anything different than in the way he's dealt with anyone else. He just honors that the centurion understands who he is, and he blesses and he heals for that centurion. Heals that centurion's. I believe it's his daughter in one scenario, and I forget what the other miracle is. But anyway, so it'd be interesting for the audience, if you will, just go back and look at the fact that if you're looking for the white man in Jesus' world, if you will, that's the Romans, that's the centurions. They did a lot of not good things, right? As a they complied with the Pharisees. But when you look at how Jesus himself dealt with the individual, you don't have a whole lot of that, but you do have it in the centurion, and it's interesting that what light the Bible shows that person in. That doesn't make my point in all that is that Jesus was a Jew, and he could have had an implicit bias against the Romans, and could have not wanted to deal with them. And then of course you have the Samaritan woman at the well, which is another kind of a couple lines in that particular story.
So if I'm hearing you, I think there's 2 things going on in the example you're bringing is because we're talking about this, obviously in the colorblind aspect, we're talking about usually the way it works is a white person is saying, I don't see color, as a way to kind of move into whether it's color evasion, power evasion, or some way in which they're trying to show I'm not prejudiced, right? And again, in our society where we're talking about the majority being predominantly white and being carrying a lot of power, the centurion plays in your story. The centurion plays that white person in some ways. So they have the same power that the white people have socially. So what I see in that is this story is included right in the canon here. It is a story in which Jesus affirms the centurion for coming with that kind of faith and that kind of mindset, and so the centurion is practicing colorblindness. Is not in some ways, right? Or they're going, I'm not seeing.
That's a good point. Like from the centurion point of view, he doesn't see Jesus as less.
Right.
He sees Jesus as what he is.
Right.
Whatever Jesus is, he believes him to be what he is, unaffected by his brownness.
Yes. Now he understands the situation and the position where Jesus is in society. Right.
Yes.
He understands that, but he ascribes value to what this particular part of society can bring to society as a whole. Right. He knows that Jesus, although a Jew and is different, I think there is a sense that he recognizes, because many times they're trying to kind of do it on the sly. Right. They're not having, although some centurions like, you can come to my house, but there's this sense of they're doing it away from the other centurions.
Yeah.
And so there's this sense that I know that us talking will be not looked upon great, but I also know that you, or the Jews, if you will, or you particularly as a Jew, the king of the Jews, have something of value that will help me do life better, right? And so Jesus shows this and gives props to this guy for doing that, and shows, and it's teaching, if we were to bring this into our space now presently, bringing and saying, white people, look, you can recognize that that these people are people of color, but come with the recognition of they have value to the world. They have value to your world, right? And so it's a both and, like,
right.
But and so Jesus the same is responding also recognizing that this is a Roman. This is someone who's different. There's a different color. There's a different ethnicity. This is an ethnic conversation that they're having. Right. And instead of kind of saying, I'm not going to deal with this person, but he says, I also will bring something to this. Like he allows himself to be utilized for this conversation.
Right. So, and he lifts this guy up. Like he says, I'm looking at here, it says, truly, I tell you, I found not found anyone in Israel with such great faith, which is that's a
it's an affirmation. If as a person of color,
that's a huge statement to the Jews.
Yeah,
who saying, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
Well, we've been getting
oppressed. We've been getting oppressed by these guys.
But we've been doing our whole lives. You're saying that this guy, his faith is greater than ours, but he doesn't even follow the law. Anyway, so that's the religious side of it. But Jesus doesn't allow the culture even of the Roman lifestyle to devalue the faith that he had in him. And in that sense, his race, his culture, all that stuff didn't seem to play very much into how much he valued the faith of the centurion.
Yeah, and I love it because, again, so many times we talk about this, how white people should respond. I think this has a sense of even how people of color should respond in the conversation of colorblindness.
Right.
The idea of when someone does come and engage you well, recognizes that you are different, but sees value in it, we should lift that up and say, this is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Look at how we're doing this. We should accept that and look at it as a good thing. And so if I'm white, I'm thinking, okay, I need to recognize that they knew that we can't culturally. They knew he was a Jew, and it said he didn't go. He didn't act in such a way of, well, you're not. I'm gonna just erase the fact that you're a Jew and just come hang out with me. Like, no, you couldn't do that. Culturally, it's not like America where we can kind of move through those lines. You couldn't move through those lines.
Right.
And so he recognized him as a Jew, but then saw value in him, and I think that's really good.
Well, he just saw Jesus for who he really was.
Yeah.
And he didn't allow the Jewness of Jesus to change.
I like Jewness of Jesus. I like that. I feel like we need a shirt.
We get a little shirt. He didn't allow that to change because if he had, then he would have saw that he had authority over Jesus. He would have came to the saying, you will come to my house and you will do this thing because I have authority over you.
Yeah.
So for him, he lays down all the social constructs. Mm-hmm. Right. And he just sees Jesus as for what he is, what he actually is. And then he sees himself in relation to that, and he intersects.
Yeah, I think that speaks to, I think one of the ways in which it's one of the ways you sort of deal and understand colorblindness and even deal with it is you have naturalized and spiritualized, right? And so the naturalized tell you one story, right? It's like, here's how, I'm going to see naturally. This is where when you get in a conversation of colorblindness, people are like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You see me. Yeah. I'm a different color, right? It's you don't do that. That makes me think you think I'm stupid. Right. That I'm not, that you're saying, I don't see color. So that's where I go, okay, push that out of this way. And it's a deeper thing that's going on here. And so the naturalized, you can't get away from that. You got to see color. You got to see culture. You got to see all that. But there is a limit to what we can really see. And so I think about when Nicodemus comes to Jesus in the middle of the night, and he's saying, how do I get saved? And Jesus tells him this phrase, John 3:3, he says, very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. Mm-hmm. And that phrase, see the kingdom of God, right? I was reading through, I forget Daniel's book, White Awake, and he makes a point about this space and talking about the spiritual eyes. Like, many times in the conversation of colorblindness, we are attempting to shut down our spiritual eyes. This, like your centurion, he's seeing something beyond what his natural eye is telling. He's seeing something spiritual, that Christ has something more for him. And this is, but we're shutting down in that conversation of colorblind. We're shutting down our spiritual eyes, which are uniquely designed to see what God sees in a person. Right? To recognize the intentionality in the image of God in front of you. It is a gift from God, and yet we try to push it away. This centurion leaned into, right, a faith. A faith is what made him lean in.
The thing that you can't see.
The thing that you can't see made him lean in and see through another lens, and he saw the value of this person. He saw the way God saw Jesus, if you will. Mm-hmm. The Father saw Jesus, and how valuable he was and what he had to bring to the conversation. It was a spiritual thing. And so when we get into this, to me, when we're talking about this idea of colorblindness, we have to we have to really evaluate, how am I actually seeing this person?
Right.
I know there's a physiological, I'm seeing this person, I'm going to push that out, but you can't push that out. It's real. But we have to start asking the question, am I truly seeing you if I don't see all of you? Right? Because that's the way that conversation, when colorblindness bothers me, is God actually created me this way intentionally. And see, we're talking about Jesus, right? Jesus in Colossians we're reminded in Colossians that all things were created not only for him, but by him, right? So when you talk about creation, and you're talking about, you can go back to Adam and Eve, right? Genesis 2:26, and he says, let us create man in our image, and male and female who created them, right? There was a sense that when Christ created Adam and Eve, he made them male and female, and then what he did is in the genetic makeup of Adam and Eve, he placed the ability to see all the colors that you see around you in people. Just like we see it in the flowers and the difference in the flowers, and we see it in the difference in animals. And there's intentionality when he creates flowers that are different colors so that they can be pollinated and they can fill the earth. And there's intentionality when he gives colors to animals, like the male species usually is bright and colorful so that it attracts predators away. The same intentionality exists in when God created us. It's not an accident that each of us have these different shades, but rather it's intentional. God did it intentionally, and since he did it intentionally, he had a purpose for it. Right. It was a way in which, if we look back at the Genesis standpoint, it was meant to actually
bring us together.
Well, not even bring us together, but to actually reflect himself. Right. Almost as if you cannot even truly see God without seeing all of who he is, male, female, and diverse in color. Because he dropped those into the creation of who we are. And even gave us, at the end, it became almost like this, the way he created, it was not a mistake, it wasn't a curse, but it was an intentional element that would be a part of the vision that he had holistically with the people of God. Because you can just go back to the end you go to the end of the book, you go to Revelation. What do we find? We find a church that's praising God, right? Hanging with God, like Revelation 7:9, right? Behold, I looked at great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, people groups, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to God and the Lamb. That vision at the end is a it is something that the Apostle John saw. He used his eyes. Because they were dressed the same. So it wasn't like you can go, oh, they were dressed different. That's why he saw the people in cultures. Oh, they were holding different banners and things. That's what it was. No, they were holding palm branches and they were dressed in white robes. So when he saw them, he saw difference.
He saw shades.
There were shades, right? And I love that as a black man, right? Because I go, oh, I don't have to become white in heaven.
Right.
Because I think I grew up thinking, like, when I go to heaven, everybody's just going to be white. And we all just get uniformly standardized colorblind society, that heaven is the ultimate colorblind society where God just says, I'm just going to uniformly create you all looking the same. But the fact that he keeps us in our tribes, tongues, languages, ethnic groups makes me think that is of value to him. And therefore, we as people on this planet should see that as value to us when we come in contact with a person who is a different shade, a different ethnic group, from a different culture.
Right.
That we should see the way God sees and see value.
Right.
Instead of ignoring it, instead of pushing it to the side, I think what we need is to see value and do something with that.
Right. And the social constructs are a distraction, to say it lightly.
Yeah.
It's this huge distraction because there's a totally different value system that we use socially.
Yeah.
To determine value.
Right.
Than what you just described, to allow God to be the determinant of value, which is what he established.
Yeah.
I believe that's why he establishes that you shall not murder. Why? Because the value of life is defined by me, God says.
Yeah. Well, I think that's
not by you.
Right.
And so you don't get to make a determination of who gets to live and who gets to die.
Right.
You're overstepping your authority when you do that.
Exactly. And so I think if we go back to the original question of if Jesus is Jesus colorblind, I think that is, I think that would have to be a no. He can't be, because he created colors, and he intentionally created these groups that we see, and it was for a purpose, something that was actually going to make our lives better, an opportunity to make for us to come together in different ways, to learn from one another, and ultimately, it was an opportunity for us to actually create the image of God on earth so that we could experience God more fully here. Yeah? Huh? Maybe that's it. Maybe that's then the answer of it.
Maybe.
Maybe. I don't know. I know there's still things out there, right? There's
good.
all kinds of...
Well, because people are going to, you're going to get, even though we tried to describe colorblind on the front end of it, typically the answer is both and when it comes to God. He's this paradoxical deal. So the answer really is
yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, God acknowledges the beauty of himself in every culture.
But no,
he does not assign value. Or does not determine value based on those.
He doesn't set a different value.
A different value
for different races.
For different.
Right. He's not going to allow prejudice to speak.
Because at the end of the day, he sees him. He should. Yep. He desires to see himself.
Right.
And he is value.
Yeah. I think that's good. I think you're right. Most of the time, it's going to be those both ands, right? And that's just kind of the nature of the conversation. But I think it's helpful to kind of be able to walk through all those differences and all those ways in which we can see it, and hopefully that's helpful in the conversation as we move through. That's really the desire that we want to do here at Color Commentary. We are always on the clock doing CC time, Color Commentary time. I think we probably went longer than we wanted to go, but I think it's a really good basic conversation. I'm not going to say basic, but baseline conversation for dealing with conversation around race and culture and dealing with this colorblind culture. So, man, we're so glad that you guys were able to join us here today. Let's just say this is just one episode. We're going to try several and see what we think about this. Want to send a shout out to our producer, Raleigh Pickens. What's up, Raleigh? So glad you're there. He did a great job.
He's waving at everybody.
He's waving. That's right. It's hard to see through the microphone.
You guys let us know. I don't know. We don't have anything contact yet, but once we you guys let us know what you think about stuff.
Yeah, definitely. You can go. Look, there's definitely ways. I mean, you can go to our Facebook page on Threaded. We Are Threaded is our Facebook page. You can go and leave some comments there about the podcast, and we'll try to create some more environments and ways in which we can get those commentaries, and even tell us, what do you want to talk about, right? Like, what are some of the concepts that you want to deal with, and we'll definitely put some of those things together. So, hey, I'm Marcus Lloyd. So glad you're here with my friend Antwuan.
Yay.
So good. This has been Color Commentary. We will see you next time.